"You're suspended until you say sorry to my ex." My husband, the CEO, snapped before the entire company. The room erupted in laughter. My face flushed, but I only replied, "Fine." The next morning, he jeered, "Finally know your place." Then he saw my desk empty, my badge missing, and legal storming in, shaking. "Sir, what have you done? This is it, isn't it?" The moment you realize everything you thought was real, everything you built with someone you loved, was just a meticulously crafted illusion. The sting of becoming utterly invisible in your own life, erased by the very person who was supposed to be your partner. The hum of the Spring Tech Expo was a chaotic symphony of ambition and ego that day, 3 months before my world shattered. Bright lights glared down on the main stage, where Liam stood, charismatic and confident, basking in the glow as he sold our revolutionary security framework to a rapt, packed auditorium. Investors leaned forward, journalists scribbled notes, soaking up his every word. And me? I was a ghost in the wings, watching through a gap in the curtain, clutching a backup presentation file on a USB drive like a forgotten relic. Just in case. Always, just in case. When the moderator, beaming, asked Liam who'd built the core architecture, he flashed that charming, practiced smile. "We have an incredible development team," he announced, his voice smooth as silk. "Real innovators." My name, Sophia Davis, 34 years old, systems architect, lead developer, co-founder, though you'd never know it from the company website, wasn't mentioned. Not once. For 7 years, I'd been the invisible backbone of Winter's Tech Solutions. The woman who built the skeleton while everyone else admired the suit. 7 years ago, this company was just a glimmer in Liam's eye and raw lines of code in mine. We started in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors' arguments through the walls and the radiator clanged like a prisoner trying to escape. Liam had the charisma, the business school network, the ability to walk into a room and make people believe in things that didn't exist yet. I had the technical genius, the ability to actually build those things. We'd sit across our tiny kitchen table, laptops glowing, takeout containers piling up. He'd pitch ideas. I'd write code. He'd charm investors. I'd make the product work. It felt like a partnership. It felt like love. When we incorporated, Liam became CEO. I became CTO. He took the corner office with the view, I took the workspace near the server room where the fluorescent lights hummed too loud and gave me headaches. But it was fine. I told myself we were building something together. We were partners in business and marriage. That was supposed to mean something. For a while, it did. But somewhere between our Series C funding and hiring our 50th employee, something shifted. Liam stopped introducing me as his co-founder. At investor dinners, I became our lead developer. At tech conferences, I was part of the team. Investors would shake Liam's hand, congratulate him on his vision, and their eyes would slide right past me like I was furniture. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that this was just how the industry worked. Women in tech get used to being overlooked. We learn to swallow it, smile politely, and keep building. I see now that I was being erased, fully, methodically, one introduction at a time. Then, 6 months ago, Chloe Miller walked back into our lives like a hurricane in designer heels. Liam's ex-wife. The woman whose name used to make his jaw tighten whenever it came up. Their divorce had been brutal, messy accusations, ugly custody fights over their daughter, Grace, lawyers billing hours like they were printing money. I'd held Liam through it all. I'd listened to him vent. I'd reassured him when he doubted himself. I'd been the good wife, the supportive partner. So, when the board announced Chloe's hiring as Chief Innovation Officer, I felt like I'd been sucker punched. It wasn't my choice, Liam said that evening over dinner, not quite meeting my eyes. The investors insisted. Her reputation in tech is valuable. She has connections we need. What he didn't say, what I found out later from our CFO, Mark, after too many drinks at a company happy hour, was that Chloe had leverage. Dirt on 2 board members from her consulting days. Nothing illegal, just embarrassing enough to motivate cooperation. She positioned herself perfectly, and the board caved. Chloe's first staff meeting was a masterclass in subtle dominance. She walked in wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, her dark hair swept back in a way that screamed effortless confidence. She smiled at everyone, warm and charming. Then her eyes landed on me. "You must be Liam's wife," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Not Sophia, not the CTO. Liam's wife." I shook her hand and felt the deliberate dismissal in her grip, firm enough to seem professional, quick enough to show she didn't consider me worth her time. Over the following weeks, Chloe made her presence known. She attended meetings she had no business being in. She interrupted my technical explanations with buzzword-heavy suggestions that sounded impressive but meant nothing. She'd smile at Liam after contradicting me, and he'd nod thoughtfully like she'd just discovered fire. Worse, she started presenting ideas that I recognized, concepts I'd sketched out in internal documents, approaches I'd mentioned in team meetings. She'd repackaged them with trendy language and presented them as her own innovations. And Liam? He said nothing. Just looked away every time she undermined me, like if he ignored it hard enough, it wouldn't be happening. I started noticing other things, too. The way Liam's assistant, Jennifer, would schedule meetings with Chloe without including me, even when they were discussing systems I'd built. The way Liam came home later and later, always with some excuse about investor calls or board prep. The way he checked his phone constantly at dinner, smiling at messages he wouldn't share. 3 months ago, everything came to a head. Chloe launched what she called her revolutionary security redesign. A flashy, buzzword-stuffed proposal that looked amazing in PowerPoint and would have been a catastrophe in reality. The board loved it. Liam championed it. And over my explicit warnings about architectural vulnerabilities, they greenlit the implementation. 2 weeks later, we nearly had a data breach that would have exposed client information for 3 Fortune 500 companies. Alarms went off at 2 a.m. I got the emergency call. Not Liam, not Chloe. Me. For 6 straight weeks after that, I lived at the office. 18-hour days became my normal. I rebuilt what Chloe had broken line by line, fixing vulnerabilities while simultaneously maintaining the systems that kept the company running. I missed dinners. I missed sleep. I survived on cold coffee and the kind of exhaustion that makes your bones ache. Meanwhile, Liam attended galas with Chloe. I saw the photos on the company's Instagram, the two of them smiling at charity auctions, posing with local tech celebrities, looking like the perfect executive team. The captions praised their visionary leadership. My name wasn't mentioned once. When I finally fixed everything, when I prevented the breach and rebuilt the security framework to be stronger than before, I waited for acknowledgement. Thank you. Maybe even a bonus for saving the company from a multi-million-dollar disaster. Instead, there was silence. Liam came home late one night smelling like Chloe's perfume, that expensive floral scent I'd started associating with sleepless nights and suppressed anger. He mumbled something about an investor dinner and fell asleep without asking how I was, without noticing the dark circles under my eyes or the way my hands shook from too much caffeine and too little rest. That's when I started wondering if I was still a partner in this marriage and company, or just someone useful, a means to an end. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Liam kissed me goodbye without looking up from his phone. "Big meeting today," he muttered, already halfway out the door. I assumed he meant the merger discussion we'd been preparing for. I dressed carefully that morning, navy blazer, white blouse, my favorite heels, the outfit that made me feel professional and confident. I walked into the conference room expecting quarterly results. Maybe some strategic planning. Instead, I found Liam at the podium, with Chloe standing beside him like a co-conspirator. The air felt wrong immediately. Heavy. Charged with something hostile. My assistant, Emily, caught my eye for a split second, then looked away fast. Too fast. That's when I knew something bad was coming. Liam's voice cut through the room like a blade. Before we discuss Q3 results, I need to address a personnel matter. And then he looked directly at me. 200 pairs of eyes turned in unison. I felt my stomach drop. That awful sensation of freefall with no ground in sight. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment everything would change. The moment I'd stop being invisible, the moment I'd stop letting them erase me. But first, I had to let them think they'd won. Liam's voice carried across the conference room with practiced authority, each word landing like a gavel strike. It's come to my attention that unprofessional behavior has created a hostile work environment in our development division. He paused for effect. The room held its breath. Sophia, you're suspended from all projects until you issue a formal apology to Chloe. The silence shattered into 100 whispered conversations. Heads swiveled toward me like I was a defendant awaiting sentencing. Someone's chair scraped against the floor. A laptop closed with a soft click. The woman from marketing actually gasped. My face burned, but not from shame. From fury so white-hot I could feel it radiating through my skin. I hadn't yelled at Chloe. I hadn't thrown anything or made a scene. 3 days ago, during a client presentation, she'd stood up and claimed credit for the adaptive encryption model. My encryption model. The one I'd spent 9 months developing and documenting. She'd smiled at the clients and said, "This innovative approach is something I've been pioneering." I'd waited until after the meeting, kept my voice level, said simply, "Actually, that's based on my framework from 2019. The documentation is time-stamped." Liam had been standing right there. He'd seen Chloe's face flush. He'd heard her fumble for a response, and instead of backing me up, he'd glared at me like I'd committed some unforgivable act of betrayal. Like correcting the record was somehow worse than stealing credit. Now he was punishing me for it publicly, in front of 200 employees. Chloe sat in the front row, examining her manicured nails with studied disinterest, but I caught the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. She was enjoying this. She'd probably suggested it. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell everyone exactly what Chloe had done, what Liam had allowed, how I'd been erased and undermined for months while I held this company together with code and caffeine. I wanted to demand they look at the timestamps, the commit logs, the documented proof of everything I'd built. But I knew better. Corporate politics has rules. Emotion makes you look unstable. Anger makes you look unprofessional. Fighting back in the moment makes you the villain, not the victim. The person who stays calm wins. The person who controls the narrative survives. So, I did something Liam clearly hadn't expected. I smiled. Small, controlled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "All right," I said. One word. Simple. Final. The whispers stopped dead. Liam's confident expression flickered. Just for a second, confusion crossed his face, followed by something that looked almost like irritation. He'd wanted resistance. He'd staged this whole performance expecting me to argue, to defend myself, to give him justification for the humiliation. I gave him compliance instead. The worst kind, the kind that offered no satisfaction. Chloe's smile faltered, too. She glanced at Liam, then back at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. She'd expected tears, maybe even an outburst she could use as further ammunition. I gave her nothing. I stood slowly, deliberately, and gathered my tablet from the table. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. I looked like someone accepting a reasonable request, not someone whose husband had just publicly destroyed her in front of the entire company. Then I walked toward the exit. My heels clicked against the marble floor in a steady rhythm, each step measured and deliberate, like a metronome counting down to something none of them could see yet. Behind me, the whispers started again, quieter now, confused. Did she just agree? She's not even fighting back. Maybe she actually did something wrong. I heard Chloe's soft laugh, breathy and triumphant. The sound scraped against my spine, but I didn't turn around. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten under my skin. The conference room doors closed behind me with a soft whoosh, sealing off the noise. The hallway stretched ahead, empty and sterile under fluorescent lights that hummed like trapped insects. "Sophia!" Emily's voice echoed behind me. My assistant, 26, sharp as a blade, loyal to a fault, was jogging to catch up, her badge bouncing against her chest. "Sophia, wait, what just happened?" I kept walking, my stride unbroken. "Accountability," I said, my voice flat. "What?" "That doesn't." "Sophia, this is insane. You didn't do anything wrong. Everyone knows Chloe." "Not here," I cut her off gently but firmly. Emily fell silent, but she stayed beside me as I walked through the open-plan workspace. Developers I'd hired and mentored kept their eyes glued to their monitors. Junior engineers suddenly found their phones incredibly interesting. The woman who'd asked me for career advice just last week stared intensely at her keyboard like it held the secrets of the universe. Fear. That's what I was seeing. They were afraid to be associated with me now that I'd been marked. I passed the break room where someone was microwaving fish, the universal signal that all corporate norms had collapsed. Two interns stood by the coffee maker watching me walk by with wide eyes, their conversation dying mid-sentence. The elevator took forever to arrive. Emily stood beside me, fidgeting with her ID badge, clearly wanting to say something but not knowing what. When the doors finally opened, she grabbed my arm. "Sophia, you can't just leave. You have to fight this." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was young enough to still believe fairness mattered in corporate America. Young enough to think the truth would protect you. "I'm suspended," I said quietly. "There's nothing to fight right now." "But Emily," I softened my voice, "trust me, this isn't over." The elevator doors closed between us, and I watched her worried face disappear as I descended. I didn't go home. My car seemed to drive itself through downtown traffic, weaving between delivery trucks and taxis until I reached a nondescript office building 15 minutes from Winters Tech, the kind of place that houses accountants and insurance adjusters and small consulting firms nobody's heard of. Third floor, Suite 304. The door was plain gray with frosted glass, labeled only with WC, Winter Security Consulting. Liam didn't know about this place. I'd rented it 3 years ago, registered the business quietly, and told him I needed a private workspace for hobby projects. He'd nodded absently and gone back to his emails, never asking what those projects were. This was where I kept everything that mattered. Encrypted backups of every system I'd ever built for Winters Tech. Every contract, every email, every documented conversation. 7 years of evidence showing that I had created the infrastructure that made the company worth $200 million. I sat down at my desk, booted up the secure server, and pulled up the original operating agreement. The one Liam had signed when we incorporated 7 years ago. Most people don't read legal documents. They skim the highlights, trust their lawyers, and sign where they're told. Liam was no exception. His lawyer had been his fraternity brother from business school. Competent enough, but not meticulous. I'd been meticulous. Section 12, Subsection D, Intellectual Property Reversion Clause. The language was dry and technical, buried in the middle of page 8. It stated that if I were ever terminated or suspended without documented cause and proper arbitration proceedings, all proprietary technology one personally developed would immediately revert to my ownership. The company would retain a temporary license, but would be required to negotiate new terms within 30 days. I'd insisted on that clause, told Liam it was standard protection for technical founders in case the company ever got acquired or went through hostile board changes. He'd shrugged, kissed me, and said, "Whatever makes you comfortable, babe. We're in this together." Together, right? I opened my calendar. Today was Tuesday. That gave Liam until midnight to provide documented cause for my suspension through proper channels. He wouldn't. He couldn't. Because there was no cause, just Chloe's wounded ego and his cowardice. At midnight, the clause would activate automatically. I spent the next 4 hours working methodically. Every core system I'd built, the security protocols, the client databases, the encryption frameworks, the access management tools, all of it ran through authentication servers I'd personally configured. I didn't delete anything. I didn't corrupt any data. I simply transferred ownership and authentication requirements. Every system now pointed to Winter Security Consulting LLC as the licensing authority. At 6 p.m., I set the access revocation to trigger at 12:01 a.m. Then I locked up the office, drove home, and started cooking dinner. Liam arrived at 9 o'clock. Tie loosened, jacket slung over his shoulder. He looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd handled an unpleasant task and could finally relax. Rough day? I asked, stirring pasta sauce at the stove. He kissed my forehead absently, already pulling his phone out to check messages. Leadership is exhausting, but necessary. Someone has to make the hard calls. Absolutely, I said, keeping my voice light. Accountability is so important. He didn't catch the edge beneath my words. Didn't notice the way I was watching him. Didn't see the smile I was hiding behind the steam rising from the pot. We ate dinner mostly in silence. Liam scrolled through emails between bites. I sipped wine and thought about timestamps and access protocols and the beautiful, terrible precision of well-written code. That night, he fell asleep quickly, one arm thrown across his eyes, snoring softly. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, watching the minutes tick toward midnight on the alarm clock. 11:47, 11:52. 11:58, at exactly 12:01 a.m., somewhere in a server room downtown, automated processes began executing. Access tokens expired. Authentication requests failed. System after system politely informed users that their licenses were no longer valid. And for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. Not because the revenge was sweet, but because I was finally, completely ready. I woke at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand like a trapped insect trying to escape. Liam was still asleep beside me, one arm flung across the pillow, mouth slightly open, peaceful, oblivious. I reached for my phone and saw the notifications stacking up like a traffic pileup. 15 missed calls. 23 text messages. The notification count was still climbing as I watched. CTO Daniel, emergency systems down. Call immediately. IT director, every server locked. What's happening? Liam's assistant, need you. Everything's broken. I silenced my phone and set it face down on the nightstand. Then I got up, padded to the kitchen, and started making coffee. Real coffee, not the instant garbage Liam preferred. I ground the beans slowly, listening to the mechanical whir, breathing in the rich, dark smell. The French press took 4 minutes to steep. I counted each one, watching the sky lighten through the kitchen window, turning from deep blue to pale gray. At 12:01 a.m., while Liam slept soundly beside me, every system at Winters Tech had gone dark. Not crashed, not corrupted, just locked. Security badges stopped working. Access tokens expired. The investor portal that clients check daily for portfolio updates displayed a single polite message, license invalid. Please contact Winter Security Consulting LLC for authorization. I imagined the overnight IT team's panic. The frantic calls to supervisors. The supervisor calling the CTO. The CTO calling Liam. All of them running diagnostics, rebooting servers, checking network connections, doing everything except understanding the actual problem. They'd built their empire on my foundation. Now the foundation was asking for rent. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it and poured my coffee, adding cream until it turned the exact shade of caramel I liked. The first sip was perfect, hot, smooth, slightly bitter. I stood at the window and watched the city wake up. Delivery trucks rumbling past. Early commuters hurrying toward the subway. A woman walking 3 small dogs that kept tangling their leashes. Normal people having normal mornings. None of them knew that 15 blocks away, a $200 million company was quietly suffocating. By 6:30 a.m., my phone had received 42 calls. I'd answered exactly 0. Liam stumbled into the kitchen at 7:15, hair sticking up, wearing the ratty Columbia t-shirt he'd had since business school. He squinted at me, confused. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, which was technically true. I'd been too satisfied to sleep much past 5. He grabbed his phone from the charger, and his face immediately shifted from sleepy to alert. "Jesus Christ, what the..." His thumb scrolled rapidly. 37 missed calls. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. He dialed someone, pressing the phone to his ear. "Daniel, what's going on?" "I just saw." He paused, listening. His face cycled through confusion, irritation, then something darker. "What do you mean the systems are locked?" "All of them?" Another pause. His eyes found mine across the kitchen. I met his gaze calmly, coffee cup raised to my lips. "Some kind of licensing issue." His voice rose slightly. "That doesn't make any sense." "We own..." He stopped. Realization was starting to dawn. Slow and terrible. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Get legal on this now." He hung up and stared at me. "Did you know about this?" "About what?" I asked innocently. "The systems, everything's down. It says there's some kind of licensing error, but that's impossible because we own everything." He stopped again, the pieces finally clicking together in his sleep-deprived brain. "Sophia, what did you do?" I set my coffee cup down gently. "I didn't do anything, Liam. The systems are working exactly as designed. They're just asking for proper authorization." "What are you talking about?" "You should probably call Elizabeth," I said. "Your lawyer." "This seems like a legal question." His jaw clenched. "Sophia, if you sabotaged company systems..." "I didn't sabotage anything," I interrupted, keeping my voice level. "I suggest you check the operating agreement. Section 12, subsection D. The clause you signed 7 years ago." He stared at me like I was speaking another language. Then he turned and stalked toward the bedroom, already dialing another number. I finished my coffee in the quiet kitchen, rinsed the cup, and got dressed. Navy blazer, white blouse, the same outfit I'd worn to yesterday's humiliation. But today it felt different. Today it felt like armor. At 7:30, Liam called my personal line. I was in my car by then, sitting in traffic on the expressway, NPR murmuring on the radio about congressional budget negotiations. I let his call go to voicemail. He called again immediately. I declined it. Third call. Decline. Fourth call. I answered, putting him on speaker. "Sophia." His voice was tight, strained. The tone of a man trying very hard to stay calm. "What the hell is going on?" "The systems are completely down. Eddie says there's some kind of licensing issue. Every access token is showing expired." I said non-committally. "That's strange. Don't play games with me." The line was crackling. "Fix this, now." I merged into the exit lane, signaling carefully. "I would love to help, Liam, but I'm suspended. Remember?" Until I apologized to Chloe for my unprofessional behavior. The silence on the other end was so complete I thought he'd hung up. Then, quietly, "This isn't funny." "I completely agree," I said. It's actually quite serious. You have clients who need access to their portfolios. Employees who can't get through security. A merger deadline in 3 weeks. This is very, very serious. Sophia, you should probably call legal, I continued calmly. Elizabeth will be able to explain the situation better than I can. Have a good day, Liam. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. My heartbeat was calm, measured. This was power, and it felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. I arrived at Winters Tech at 8 a.m. exactly. The lobby was absolute chaos. The security turnstiles were offline, their little red lights blinking like angry eyes. A crowd of employees was bunched up near the elevators, which were apparently locked on some floors. The receptionist, normally polished and unflappable, looked close to tears as she manually logged people in on a paper signing sheet, her handwriting getting progressively shakier. Sophia Davis, I said when I reached the front desk. I have a meeting with legal. She barely glanced at me, just waved me through with a frazzled, go ahead. I took the stairs. The elevators were apparently only working intermittently, and I climbed to the executive floor. My heels echoed in the concrete stairwell, steady and rhythmic. The executive floor was somehow worse. Liam's assistant, Jennifer, was at her desk juggling 3 phones, her normally perfect blonde hair falling out of its bun. When she saw me, relief flooded her face. Oh, thank God. He's in his office. It's really bad. I'm sure it is, I said calmly. I didn't knock. I just opened the door and walked in. Liam was behind his desk, still in yesterday's wrinkled dress shirt, no tie. Surrounding him were Daniel, the CTO, looking pale and exhausted, 2 IT managers I recognized but couldn't name, both frantically typing on laptops, and Elizabeth Holloway, our lead attorney, holding a thick folder and looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. They all looked like they'd aged a decade overnight. Daniel had dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd been up all night. One of the IT managers was literally shaking as he typed. When Liam saw me, his face cycled through a rapid sequence of emotions, confusion, anger, desperate hope, and then something I'd never seen there before. Fear. What are you doing here? He demanded. You're suspended. I set my bag down on the chair by the door and kept my voice calm. Professional. I'm here as a vendor. Elizabeth called me. Every head in the room swiveled toward Elizabeth. She stepped forward, holding the folder like it contained evidence of a murder. Liam, we have a significant problem. A very significant problem. I know we have a problem. Liam snapped. The systems are down. That's why I need Sophia to. The intellectual property reversion clause from your original operating agreement has been triggered, Elizabeth interrupted. Her voice was tight, carefully controlled. As of midnight last night. Liam blinked. What clause? I smiled. Just slightly. Section 12, subsection D. The one you signed 7 years ago when we incorporated. Elizabeth opened the folder and pulled out a document. The original operating agreement, covered in sticky tabs and highlighted sections. As of 12:01 a.m. this morning, Sophia legally owns all proprietary systems she personally developed, every security protocol, every encryption framework, every database architecture. Without her explicit authorization, the company cannot operate. The blood drained from Liam's face so quickly I thought he might actually faint. That's impossible, he whispered. It's notarized, Elizabeth said, time-stamped. And according to 3 different attorneys I consulted at 6 this morning, completely ironclad. Daniel made a strangled sound. You're saying Sophia owns our entire infrastructure? Not exactly, Elizabeth corrected. She owns the intellectual property. The company has a temporary license that expired when she was suspended without documented cause and proper arbitration proceedings. Liam turned to Me, voice rising. You can't do this. This is extortion. Actually, I said calmly. I didn't do anything. You did, when you suspended me publicly, without cause, without documentation, and without following the arbitration process outlined in the operating agreement. Elizabeth nodded. She's right. The suspension triggered the clause automatically. Liam's face shifted from white to red. You planned this. I prepared for this, I corrected. There's a difference. His hands were shaking. Actually shaking. Do you have any idea what you've done? We have the Caldwell merger in 3 weeks. We have clients who need access. We have. I know exactly what you have, I interrupted. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The room went silent. Even the IT manager stopped typing. Liam looked around desperately, at Daniel, at Elizabeth, at the IT team. No one was coming to his rescue. No one had a solution. Finally, his shoulders sagged. What do you want? I picked up my bag and walked toward the conference table, settling into a chair like I was attending any normal meeting. Let's discuss terms. Liam lunged forward, hands slamming against the conference table hard enough to make the laptops jump. Fix this now. I didn't flinch, didn't blink, just looked at him with the same calm expression I'd give a stranger asking for directions. I'd be happy to help, I said evenly. My consulting rate is $15,000 per day, plus a seat on the board, full reinstatement with back pay, and a public apology acknowledging my contributions to the company. The room went so quiet I could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. You're insane. Liam breathed, his voice somewhere between disbelief and rage. I'm expensive, I corrected. There's a difference. Daniel, the CTO, cleared his throat nervously. He looked like he'd been awake for 36 hours straight, which he probably had. Sir, with all due respect, if we don't resolve this by noon, we miss the Caldwell merger deadline. That's $40 million, plus breach of contract penalties. We're looking at total exposure of, I know what we're looking at. Liam snapped, cutting him off, but I could see it happening. The slow, terrible realization spreading across his face like ink in water. He was cornered. Completely, utterly cornered. He turned back to me, jaw clenched so hard I heard his teeth grind. Fine, whatever you want. Just fix the systems. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, and began typing. Not quite. I also want Chloe's resignation. Effective immediately, escorted out by security within the hour. His eyes widened. Absolutely not. I looked up from my phone, meeting his gaze directly. Then I guess you'll be rebuilding your entire security infrastructure from scratch. Should only take 3, maybe 4 years, assuming you can find someone with my skill set who's willing to reverse engineer everything without documentation. I paused, letting that sink in. Good luck with that merger, though. Liam opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked like a fish gasping on dry land. One of the IT managers, the younger one with the nervous habit of cracking his knuckles, spoke up quietly. She's right, sir. Without the source documentation, we'd be starting from zero. Every client integration, every security protocol, every... I get it. Liam interrupted sharply. Elizabeth, who'd been standing off to the side, watching this entire exchange like a referee at a boxing match, stepped forward and leaned close to Liam's ear. She whispered something I couldn't hear, but I watched his face shift from rage to something closer to despair. He pulled away from her and slumped back into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 42 years. What do you really want, Sophia? His voice was quiet now, stripped of the earlier bravado, almost pleading. I sat down across from him, folding my hands on the table. I want what I built. Not a licensing agreement, not consulting fees. Ownership. You want the company? He sounded genuinely shocked. Just the tech division, I clarified. You can keep your CEO title, keep your corner office with the city view, keep doing whatever it is you do at those investor galas, but I own the systems. I get 40% equity in the company, and I report directly to the board. Not to you, not to anyone else. Just the board. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel looked stunned, his mouth slightly open. The IT managers had stopped pretending to work and were just staring. Elizabeth had pulled out her laptop and was already typing, her fingers flying across the keys. Liam stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, like the woman sitting across from him was a stranger wearing his wife's face. You planned this, he whispered. I prepared for this, I corrected. There's a difference. You created the situation. I simply protected myself from it. Before he could respond, Elizabeth's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and stepped toward the door. Excuse me one moment. She opened the door and spoke quietly to someone in the hallway. When she turned back, her assistant, a sharp young woman named Ashley, followed her in, looking flustered and worried. Ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have another situation. Ashley's voice was tight. It's urgent. Elizabeth gestured for her to continue. Chloe Miller submitted a patent application last week. It came across my desk this morning during the system emergency. Ashley pulled out her tablet and handed it to Elizabeth. She's claiming she invented the adaptive security framework. The room went completely still. Then I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. Not a polite corporate chuckle, but a genuine, surprised laugh that echoed off the glass walls. She did what? Ashley turned the tablet toward me. There it was, clear as day. A patent application filed 6 days ago with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Applicant, Chloe Miller. Title, Revolutionary Adaptive Security Architecture with Dynamic Threat Response. My architecture. My 7 years of work. With her name on it. Liam's face went from exhausted gray to bone white. Chloe wouldn't. She couldn't. She absolutely would, Elizabeth interrupted, her voice sharp as she scanned the document. And she did. This constitutes fraud and intellectual property theft. If this had gone through, the company would own nothing. Chloe would own everything. I reached into my bag, the one I brought specifically for this moment, and pulled out my laptop. I opened it calmly, navigated to a secure folder, and turned the screen toward Elizabeth. Fortunately, I said, I have time-stamped code commits going back 7 years. Every single version, every iteration, every design decision, documented and stored in multiple encrypted repositories. I also have design documents, email threads, internal memos, and meeting notes. All of it predates Chloe's involvement by. I glanced at the patent filing date, approximately 6 years and 11 months. Elizabeth's expression shifted from panic to something that looked almost like admiration. She pulled the laptop closer, scrolling through the directory structure. You documented everything. I'm thorough, I said simply. Daniel leaned over to look at the screen. That's the entire development history. Every branch, every merge. He looked at me with new respect. You kept records of everything. I'm a systems architect, I said. Documentation is literally part of my job description. Liam was still staring at the patent application on Ashley's tablet. His hands were shaking slightly. Why would she? What was she thinking? She was thinking she could steal my work and sell it to the highest bidder after she left, I said flatly. Or leverage it to force the company to give her more equity. Either way, she saw an opportunity and took it. Elizabeth was already on her phone. I'm calling outside counsel. We need to file an immediate challenge to this patent application and potentially pursue criminal charges. Wait, Liam said hoarsely. Criminal charges against Chloe? She committed fraud, Elizabeth said bluntly. Filed a false patent application with stolen intellectual property. That's a federal crime, Liam. If we don't pursue it aggressively, we look complicit. I watched the reality settle over him. The woman he defended, the woman he'd chosen over me in meeting after meeting, had just tried to steal the company's most valuable asset. Liam looked at me, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you want? I leaned forward, holding his gaze. Full ownership of the tech division. 40% equity in Winter's Tech Solutions. A seat on the board with voting rights. And Chloe Miller escorted out of this building by security within the hour. Her resignation letter signed and submitted before she leaves. He opened his mouth to argue. Elizabeth cut him off before he could speak. She has all the leverage, Liam. Every system, every client contract, every piece of security infrastructure depends on Sophia's work. The patent filing proves Chloe knew exactly how valuable it was. If Sophia walks away right now, we're not just facing the Caldwell merger collapse. We're facing breach of contract lawsuits from every client, SEC investigations, and potential bankruptcy within 60 days. Liam looked around the room desperately, at Daniel, who wouldn't meet his eyes, at the IT managers who were suddenly very interested in their shoes, at Elizabeth, who was looking at him with something close to pity. No one was coming to rescue him. No one had a better solution. Finally, his shoulders sagged. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Fine, he said quietly. Elizabeth was already typing. I'll have the documents drafted within an hour. Full transfer of tech division ownership, equity restructuring, board appointment, and separation agreement for Chloe Miller. I stood, smoothing my blazer. I'll be in conference room C, waiting. I picked up my bag and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Liam say quietly, I underestimated you. I didn't turn around, but I smiled, because he was right. He had underestimated me. They all had. And now they were about to spend the next several years living with the consequences. I pulled the door open and walked out into the hallway where employees were clustered in nervous groups, whispering about the system outage. When they saw me, the conversation stopped. I walked past them with my head high, heels clicking against the tile, and headed toward the conference room where I'd wait for the documents that would change everything. The last thing I heard before the elevator doors closed was someone whispering, "Is that Sophia? What's she doing here?" I thought she was suspended. The elevator descended smoothly, a new foundation being laid. Conference room C had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the street below. I stood there watching the city move, taxis honking, pedestrians hurrying past, food trucks, a bike messenger weaving through traffic with reckless confidence. Normal people living normal lives. None of them knew that 12 floors above them, a company was being surgically dismantled and rebuilt. My phone buzzed. A text from Elizabeth, documents ready in 30. Liam signing now. I typed back, good. Then I waited. At 10:47, Emily appeared in the doorway, slightly breathless. Sophia, security just went up to the executive floor. They're heading to Chloe's office. I turned from the window. Already? Elizabeth didn't waste time. Emily's eyes were bright with something that looked like vindication. Half the floor is watching. It's like a perp walk. I shouldn't have gone to look. It was petty, unnecessary, I agreed. I went anyway. By the time I reached the open plan workspace on the executive floor, a small crowd had gathered. People pretending to be at the coffee station or the printer, but really just watching the drama unfold outside Chloe's corner office. Through the glass walls, I could see Chloe standing behind her desk, facing 2 security guards and Elizabeth. Her perfectly styled dark hair was still perfect. Her cream blazer still immaculate. But her face was twisted with rage. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read her body language, arms crossed defensively, chin raised, the posture of someone who refused to believe they'd lost. Elizabeth remained calm, holding a folder and speaking in measured tones. One of the security guards, an older man named George, who'd worked here since the company had 15 employees, stood with his hands clasped in front of him, expression carefully neutral. Chloe's voice suddenly rose loud enough to penetrate the glass. "You can't do this. I have a contract." Elizabeth's response was quieter, but I saw her open the folder and point to something on the page. "Your contract includes a morals clause about fraudulent conduct." I knew she was saying it because we discussed it in the conference room earlier. Filing a false patent application claiming ownership of intellectual property you didn't create qualifies as fraud. You're being terminated for cause effective immediately. Chloe's eyes swept the room beyond the glass, looking for allies, for witnesses, for anyone who might support her. Her gaze locked onto mine. We stared at each other across the open office floor. 30 feet of space and 7 years of resentment between us. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she mouthed something. 2 words, sharp and deliberate. I couldn't quite make them out. Maybe you witch. Maybe something worse. But the meaning was clear enough. I didn't react. Didn't smile. Didn't frown. Just looked at her with the same calm expression I'd given Liam earlier. She'd underestimated me just like he had. One of the security guards gestured toward a cardboard box on her desk. The universal symbol of corporate termination. Chloe hesitated, then grabbed a few items. A photo frame. A designer coffee mug. A leather portfolio. She didn't pack slowly or dramatically. She moved with sharp, angry efficiency, throwing things into the box without care for what broke or bent. By 11:03, she was walking toward the elevators, flanked by security, carrying the box against her chest like a shield. The crowd parted to let her through. No one spoke. No one met her eyes. When she passed me, she stopped. Just for a second. "This isn't over," she said quietly, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I looked at her steadily. "Yes, it is." The security guards urged her forward gently, and she walked to the elevator without looking back. The doors closed. She was gone. The crowd dispersed quickly after that, people scattering back to their desks with hurried whispers and sidelong glances. I caught fragments of conversations. "Did you see her face? What did she do? I heard she tried to steal company secrets." Emily appeared at my elbow. "That was intense." "That was necessary," I corrected. She nodded slowly. "People are scared now. They're wondering what else is going to change." "Everything," I said. "But that's not a bad thing." At 2 p.m., my laptop pinged with a company-wide email notification. I was in my new office. They'd moved me into one of the vacant executive suites within an hour of the documents being signed. And I watched the email appear on screens across the open workspace through my glass wall. From Liam Winters. Subject: Leadership Announcement. Team: effective immediately, Sophia Davis is promoted to Chief Technology Officer and Board Director. Her contributions to this company have been invaluable, and we are grateful for her continued leadership in advancing our mission. Please join me in congratulating Sophia on this well-deserved recognition. Best, Liam. I read it 3 times, studied every word choice, every careful omission. No mention of the suspension, no acknowledgement of yesterday's public humiliation, no apology for erasing me from the company narrative for years. Just corporate spin, polished and sanitized. But I didn't need his apology. I had something better. Power, equity, and a seat at the table where decisions were made. My inbox immediately flooded with responses. Congratulations from colleagues, questions from department heads, meeting requests from people who'd barely acknowledged my existence a week ago. I answered the important ones and ignored the rest. Emily knocked on my open door, eyes wide. It's official then? You're really on the board? I'm really on the board, I confirmed. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you been planning this? I considered the question. I wasn't planning it. I was protecting myself. There's a difference. Still, she sat down across from me. You knew exactly what to do when he suspended you. You had that clause ready. You had documentation going back years. That's not just protection. That's strategy. I smiled faintly. Let's call it defensive strategy. She laughed. Whatever you call it, half the company is terrified of you now. Good, I said. Fear breeds respect. Eventually, that Friday, I attended my first board meeting. The conference room was on the top floor. Windows overlooking the city, a massive mahogany table that probably cost more than my first car, leather chairs that whispered wealth and power. Liam sat at the head of the table, same as always. But something was different. His shoulders were tighter. His smile was forced. The easy confidence that usually filled the room like expensive cologne was gone. I sat 3 seats down on the left side. Elizabeth sat beside me, her laptop open and ready. The other board members trickled in. Andrichin, the venture capitalist who'd led our Series B, Sarah Evans, a tech industry veteran with 30 years of experience. Mark Torres, our CFO, and 2 others I recognized but hadn't worked with directly. Liam started the meeting with the standard opening remarks, but his voice lacked conviction. He stumbled slightly over the agenda items, had to check his notes twice, kept clearing his throat. When he reached the Caldwell merger discussion, he fumbled the projections, mixing up revenue forecasts and security audit timelines. Sarah frowned. Liam, can you clarify the security integration timeline? The buyer needs assurance that I can address that, I said smoothly, opening my tablet. Everyone turned toward me. I pulled up the updated security assurance documentation, the work I'd completed after rebuilding Chloe's disaster, and walked them through the integration timeline, the redundancy protocols, the third-party audit results. The room was silent except for my voice. When I finished, Andrew leaned forward. This is excellent work, Sophia. Thorough, detailed, exactly what we need. He glanced at Liam, then back to me. Why haven't we heard more from you in these meetings before? I met his gaze calmly. Good question. Liam shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's expression was carefully neutral, but I saw something shift in her eyes. A new calculation being made. The meeting continued. The board approved the merger unanimously. When Liam called for adjournment, people gathered their things quickly, clearly ready to escape the tension. Andrew caught up with me at the door. Sophia, do you have a minute? We stepped into an empty hallway alcove. I want to apologize, he said quietly. We should have made you board director years ago. Liam's been protective of the leadership structure. He wanted to maintain a certain image. He paused. We let him. You did, I agreed. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was a mistake. You've been carrying this company, technically, for a long time. Yes, I said simply. I have. It won't happen again, he said. You have my word. I nodded. I appreciate that. He smiled slightly. For what it's worth, you scared the hell out of Liam this week. That clause was brilliant. It was necessary, I corrected. Even better, he said. That evening, Liam came home after 9. I was on the couch in our condo reviewing vendor contracts for a new project, a glass of red wine on the side table. I changed into comfortable clothes, yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt, but I was still working. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just looking at me. "Happy now?" he finally asked, his voice heavy with bitterness. I looked up from the contract. "I'm satisfied." "There's a difference." He walked to the armchair across from me and sat down heavily, loosening his tie. He looked exhausted, defeated. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. "Yes," I said simply. "You did." We sat in silence for a while. The city hummed beyond our windows. A siren wailed somewhere distant. "Is this how it's going to be now?" he asked. "You at the board meetings?" "Me, what?" "Reporting to you?" "You report to the board," I said. "Same as always." "I'm just part of that board now." "That's not what I mean." I set the contract aside. "Then what do you mean, Liam?" He ran his hands through his hair. "I mean us. This marriage. Is there anything left?" I took a sip of wine, considering my answer carefully. "That depends," I said finally. "Can you treat me like a partner instead of an employee?" He was silent for a long time. The seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, he said, "I don't know." I nodded slowly. "Then we have nothing left to discuss." He stood, walked toward the bedroom, and closed the door behind him. I stayed on the couch, staring out at the city lights, blinking in the darkness. Something between us had broken, something fundamental and irreparable. And for the first time in 7 years, I was completely okay with that. The bedroom door stayed closed that night. And the next night, and the one after that. Liam moved into the guest room without discussion, taking only his pillow and a change of clothes. We passed each other in the mornings like roommates who'd signed a lease together by accident. Polite, distant. Careful not to make eye contact too long. I told myself it was temporary, that we needed space, that maybe after some time we could figure out how to exist in the same home again. But 2 weeks later, I knew the truth. We were already living separate lives. We just hadn't made it official yet. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 16 days after I'd taken my seat on the board, I called Diana Frost. Diana was a divorce attorney who'd been recommended by Elizabeth. "If you ever need to untangle a complicated marriage," Elizabeth had said carefully, "she's the best. Discreet, strategic, and she doesn't lose." Diana's office was in a sleek high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and minimalist furniture that cost more than it looked. She was in her early 50s with silver-streaked haircut in a sharp bob and glasses that made her look like a librarian who moonlighted as a corporate assassin. "Tell me what you need," she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries and she poured us both coffee from an expensive-looking French press. I laid it out simply. "I want a divorce. My husband and I own a tech company. I have 40% equity. He's the CEO. I'm CTO and board director. It's complicated, but I want it clean." Diana made notes on a legal pad, her handwriting precise and angular. "How complicated?" "We started the company together 7 years ago. I built all the proprietary technology. He handled business development. Recently, things deteriorated. He publicly humiliated me, suspended me without cause, and I had to leverage an IP reversion clause to get my position back." Diana looked up sharply. "You have an IP reversion clause in your operating agreement?" "I do, and it held up completely." She smiled. The kind of smile a chess player gives when they realize their opponent just made a fatal mistake. "Then you have significant leverage. He can't push you out. He can't buy you out without your consent. You own the foundation the company is built on." "I know," I said. "But I don't want to destroy him. I just want what's fair." Diana set down her pen. "Fair is exactly what we'll get." But Sophia, in my experience, fair often looks like victory to the person who's been underestimated for too long. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it, about Liam's face when he'd realized what I'd done. About Chloe being escorted out by security. About sitting at the board table and finally being heard. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. Liam received the divorce papers on a Thursday. I was in my office reviewing vendor contracts when Emily buzzed me. Sophia, Liam's here. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's asking to see you. I glanced at my calendar. I had 20 minutes before my next meeting. Send him in. Liam walked through the door looking like he hadn't slept in days. His tie was loosened. His shirt wrinkled. His eyes red-rimmed. He closed the door behind him carefully, like he was afraid it might shatter. Sophia, his voice was hoarse. He gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit. He sat, and suddenly he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, diminished. The confident CEO who'd commanded boardrooms and charmed investors was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost. I know I screwed up, he said quietly. The meeting, Chloe, all of it. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I can change. Just don't do this. I folded my hands on my desk. Liam, I'm not doing this to punish you. Then why? Because somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your equal. You stopped introducing me as your partner and started treating me like an employee you could discipline when I didn't perform to your expectations. He flinched. I never meant, it doesn't matter what you meant, I interrupted gently. It matters what you did. For years, you let Chloe undermine me. You stood by while investors ignored me. You took credit for work I did and acted like my contributions were just expected, like I was supposed to build the infrastructure while you collected the accolades. I didn't see it that way. I know, I said. That's the problem. He was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. What do you want from me? A clean split, I said. You keep the CEO title. I keep my equity and full control of the tech division. We remain co-owners, but we work independently. We don't have to be enemies, Liam. We just can't be married anymore. His voice was barely a whisper. Is there anything I can do to change your mind? I thought about that question. Really thought about it. Can you honestly tell me you see me as your equal? I asked. Not as my wife, not as the person who built the tech. As your equal partner in every sense of the word. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. That was answer enough. I didn't think so, I said softly. He stood slowly, like his joints hurt. I'll have my lawyer contact Diana. Thank you. He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, I really did love you. I know, I said. But love isn't enough when there's no respect. He left without another word. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. It was surprisingly amicable, as far as high-asset divorces go. Liam didn't fight me on the equity split or the tech division control. He didn't drag it out with endless motions and counter-motions. Diana suspected he knew he couldn't win. He's smart enough to recognize when he's outmatched, she said during one of our final meetings. And honestly, I think part of him knows you're right. That makes it easier. We divided our assets with surgical precision. I kept the downtown condo, the 2-bedroom with the balcony overlooking the city that I'd always loved. Liam kept the house in the suburbs, the 4-bedroom colonial with the yard and the garage he'd insisted we needed for the future. We sold the vacation property in Vermont, the cabin we bought 3 years ago with dreams of weekend getaways that never happened because Liam was always too busy with investor meetings. We split the proceeds down the middle, the retirement accounts, the investment portfolios, the art collection, all of it divided with mathematical fairness. On the day we signed the final papers, we met in a conference room at Diana's office. Liam's lawyer was there, too, a quiet man named Stephen, who mostly just reviewed documents and nodded. The notary walked us through the signatures, her voice professionally neutral. Sign here, initial here, date here. 23 pages of legal jargon, reducing 7 years of marriage to bullet points and asset divisions. When it was done, Liam looked at me across the polished conference table. His eyes were sad but clear. I really did love you, you know. I met his gaze. I know. But love isn't enough when there's no respect. He nodded slowly, understanding finally settling into his expression. I'm sorry it took me this long to see that. Me, too. We shook hands. Formal. Final. The notary witnessed it like it was just another business transaction. And maybe that's all it was anymore. The first month after the divorce was strange. I'd lived with Liam for 7 years, first in the cramped Brooklyn apartment, then in progressively nicer places as the company grew. I'd gotten used to the sound of him moving through our space. The way he left coffee cups on the counter. The particular rhythm of his breathing when he slept. Coming home to silence was disorienting at first. But slowly, I started to reclaim the space as mine. I rearranged the furniture, moving the couch away from the wall so it faced the windows instead of the TV. I painted the bedroom walls a soft gray blue that Liam had always vetoed as too cold. I hung art I'd bought years ago but never displayed because he'd called it too abstract or too modern. I bought new sheets, soft white linen that felt like sleeping in a cloud. I replaced his heavy blackout curtains with sheer ones that let the morning light filter through. Little by little, the condo stopped feeling like our space and started feeling like my space. At work, I threw myself into leading the tech division with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I hired 3 new senior developers. I launched 2 projects that had been stuck in committee for months. I reorganized the team structure to reward innovation instead of seniority. Employees who'd once avoided me in the hallways now stopped to ask questions, to pitch ideas, to seek my input on decisions. Emily became my right hand, managing schedules and priorities with fierce efficiency. You're different now, she said one afternoon as we reviewed project timelines. More, I don't know, present. I'm not carrying as much weight, I said. The divorce, among other things. She nodded. For what it's worth, I think you made the right call. You seem happier. I considered that. I think I am. One evening, about 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I stood on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over the city. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. The buildings silhouetted against the fading light. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time since Liam and I had gotten married, I felt light. Not happy exactly, not yet, but light, free, like I'd been carrying a weight so long I'd forgotten it was there. And now someone had lifted it off my shoulders. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was whole. And that, I realized, was worth more than any marriage certificate. The balcony became my thinking space. Every evening after work, I'd stand there with a glass of wine or a cup of tea, watching the city transition from day to night. The office buildings would light up one by one like stars appearing in an urban sky. I'd watch the traffic patterns shift, the rush hour chaos giving way to the quieter rhythm of evening. It was during one of these moments, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, that I realized something had fundamentally changed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. The tech division had become the crown jewel of Winter's Tech Solutions. In the 6 months since I'd taken full control, we'd grown from 32 employees to 57. I'd hired aggressively, not the safe, credentialed candidates that HR usually pushed, but young, hungry developers with unconventional backgrounds. The kid who'd taught himself to code in high school and never bothered with college. the woman who'd left a PhD program because she wanted to build things instead of theorize about them. The former gaming developer who saw security vulnerabilities the way chess masters see checkmates 3 moves ahead. They were brilliant, ambitious, and they trusted me in a way they'd never trusted Liam. We launched 2 new products that quarter. The first was an AI-driven threat detection system that learned from attack patterns in real time, adapting faster than any manual security protocol. We called it Sentinel Watch. Within 2 weeks of launch, we had 12 enterprise clients signed on, including 2 Fortune 100 companies. The second was a blockchain-based data verification platform that made it virtually impossible to tamper with audit trails. Perfect for financial services, healthcare, any industry where data integrity was critical. We called it Chain Proof. Both products were immediate hits. Tech publications ran features. Industry analysts upgraded our company ratings. Clients who'd been lukewarm suddenly wanted meetings. At the next board meeting, Andrew leaned back in his chair and said, "Sophia, your division is carrying this company. We need to talk about expansion." I'd been waiting for this. I pulled up a presentation I'd prepared. I have some ideas. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through my vision. Opening a West Coast office, hiring specialized teams for different verticals, potentially acquiring a smaller security firm to expand our capabilities. The board members listened intently, asked smart questions, nodded at the right moments. Liam sat at the far end of the table, silent. His CEO title felt increasingly ceremonial. He still managed day-to-day operations, HR issues, facility management, vendor negotiations, but I was the one driving growth. I was the one bringing in new revenue. It was a complete reversal of our original dynamic, and neither of us had quite anticipated how strange it would feel. After the meeting, Sarah pulled me aside. "That was impressive. You've really come into your own." "Thank you," I said. "Between you and me," she lowered her voice. "The board's been discussing succession planning. Liam, he's struggling. We may need to make some changes in the next year." I nodded slowly. "I understand." She studied my face. "How would you feel about that?" "It's not personal," I said. "It's what's best for the company." She smiled. Good answer. 2 weeks later, my assistant buzzed me during lunch. "Sophia, there's a Michael Hayes on the line. He says you don't know him, but he's hoping you'll take the call." I didn't recognize the name. "What company?" "Sentinel Systems." I'd heard of them. A small but promising cybersecurity startup making waves with some innovative authentication protocols. "Put him through," I said. Michael Hayes had a voice that matched his reputation. Confident, direct, no wasted words. "Miss Davis, thank you for taking my call. I'll be brief. I've been following your work for the past 2 years. The security framework you built is the best I've seen in the industry. I'd like to discuss a partnership." "What kind of partnership?" I asked. "The kind where we license your core architecture, build on it, and give you equity in Sentinel, plus a seat on our board. I want to create the next generation of security tools. And I can't do it without your foundation." It was bold, ambitious, exactly the kind of offer that would have made Liam nervous. I loved it immediately. "Let's meet," I said. We met at a coffee shop in Soho 3 days later. Michael was younger than I'd expected. Mid-30s, wearing jeans and a blazer over a t-shirt that said, "Encrypt everything." He had the kind of energy that made you sit up straighter, talk faster, think bigger. "Here's what I see," he said after we'd ordered. "The security industry is stuck. Everyone's building incremental improvements on the same old models, but your framework, the way you've architected adaptive response systems, that's genuinely innovative." "Thank you," I said. "I don't want to just license it," he continued. "I want to partner with you. Your architecture as the foundation, my team building the next layer of intelligent threat response. We split the revenue. You get 15% equity in Sentinel, and you help guide the technical direction. I sipped my coffee, considering. Why not just hire your own architect? Because they wouldn't be you, he said simply. You think 3 moves ahead. That's rare. We talked for 2 hours about security models, about the future of cyber threats, about building companies that prioritized innovation over politics. When we finally stood to leave, I shook his hand. Send me the term sheet. I'm interested. He grinned. You won't regret this. 3 months later, Sentinel Systems launched Sentinel Guard, a next-generation security platform built on my architecture and Michael's team's innovations. The tech press went wild. TechCrunch, revolutionary security platform disrupts industry standards. Wired, meet the architect behind the year's most innovative cybersecurity tool. Forbes, Sophia Davis, from corporate shadow to industry pioneer. Suddenly, I wasn't Liam's ex-wife or the developer at Winters Tech. I was Sophia Davis, innovator. My name was on conference keynotes. Podcast hosts wanted interviews. Venture capitalists asked for coffee meetings. It was surreal and validating and occasionally overwhelming. Emily helped me manage the influx. You're going to need a PR person if this keeps up, she said, scrolling through interview requests. One thing at a time, I said. But I was smiling. While I thrived, Liam struggled. It wasn't dramatic. No public meltdown, no scandal, just a slow erosion of confidence and authority. The board grew increasingly impatient with his leadership. Quarterly revenues plateaued. 2 key executives left for competitors. The company culture, which had always been Liam's strength, started to feel directionless. I heard the whispers in meetings, saw the looks exchanged between board members. One evening, I ran into Liam at a company event. One of those obligatory networking mixers where everyone pretends to enjoy warm wine and stale crackers. He was standing alone near the windows, looking out at the city. He'd lost weight. There were new lines around his eyes. Congratulations on Sentinel, he said when I approached. It's impressive work. Thank you, I said. He hesitated, swirling the wine in his glass. I've been thinking about stepping down. Maybe it's time. I studied his face. There was no bitterness there, just resignation. Maybe even relief. What would you do? I asked. He shrugged. I don't know. Consult, maybe travel. Figure out who I am without the CEO title. He laughed quietly. Turns out I've been defined by this job for so long, I'm not sure there's much else there. There is, I said. You just have to find it. He looked at me. You know, I always thought I was the visionary, the one with the big ideas. But you were the one who actually built everything. Yes, I said simply. I was. He nodded slowly, accepting that truth. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. Me, too. He finished his wine and set the glass down. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're doing well. You deserve it. He walked away before I could respond, disappearing into the crowd of networking professionals. I felt something unexpected. Not pity exactly, but a kind of sad understanding. He'd lost something he'd taken for granted. Purpose, identity, the easy confidence of being the person everyone deferred to. And there was no getting it back. A year after the divorce, I stood in my new office at Sentinel Systems. Corner suite, 20th floor. Panoramic view of the city from a different angle. Winters Tech Solutions was stable. Liam had stepped down 3 months ago, and the board had hired an outside CEO, a woman named Catherine Harris, with 20 years of operational experience. I remained CTO and board director with my 40% equity, but I wasn't there every day anymore. My real passion was Sentinel. Michael and I had built something extraordinary. Our team was small but brilliant. 23 people who could code circles around companies 10 times our size. We were working on projects that felt genuinely innovative, not just incremental improvements. Emily had followed me to Sentinel, taking a role as my chief of staff. "Wherever you go, I go," she'd said. "You're the best boss I've ever had." One evening, she stopped by my office as I was reviewing code. "You look happy," she said. I glanced up. "I am." "Any regrets?" I thought about the question, about the years I'd spent being invisible, building Liam's empire while my name disappeared from the story. About the public humiliation, the clause I'd had to activate, the marriage that had crumbled. "No," I said finally. "I regret the years I wasted being small, but not what I did to change it." She nodded. "Good, because you're kind of a legend now. People in the industry talk about you the way they talk about the greats." I laughed. "I'm just getting started." And I meant it, because building something that was truly mine, working with people who saw my value, creating technology that mattered. This was what I'd always wanted. I just had to lose everything to find it. Emily left my office that evening, and I stayed late, the way I often did now. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The city lights stretched out below me like a circuit board. Each window a connection point in a vast network of lives and ambitions. Somewhere out there, people were building things, breaking things, starting over. I was one of them now. Not the woman in the background. Not the invisible architect. Just Sophia Davis building her empire. 2 years after everything had imploded, after the suspension, the clause activation, the divorce, I attended a tech conference in Austin. It was one of those massive industry events where everyone wore branded hoodies and expensive sneakers, where panel discussions ran simultaneously across 4 ballrooms, where the coffee was surprisingly good and the networking was aggressively optimistic. I was there as a keynote speaker, building resilient security architectures in an AI-driven world. The room had been packed, standing room only, and the questions afterward had been sharp and engaged. I was riding that post-presentation high, the one where you feel like maybe you actually know what you're talking about, when I saw her. Chloe Miller. She was across the hotel ballroom at a cocktail reception, standing near a display booth for a startup I didn't recognize. She looked polished as always, tailored dress, perfect hair, but there was something strained around her eyes, a tightness that hadn't been there before. I watched her present to a small group gathered around the booth. Her gestures were animated, her smile bright, but I could read the desperation underneath. The startup was struggling. Anyone who'd been in the industry long enough could see it. After her presentation, the small crowd dispersed quickly. She was left standing alone, adjusting materials on the display table with slightly too much focus. I should have walked away. Should have gotten another glass of wine and found Michael to debrief the day. But I walked over. "Chloe." She turned, and for a split second, genuine surprise crossed her face. Then her professional mask slid into place. "Sophia." Her voice was cool, controlled. "I saw your keynote was well attended. Congratulations." "Thank you. Your presentation looked interesting." We stood there in that awkward space where 2 people who'd once been enemies try to figure out if they're still fighting. "Finally," she said, "I underestimated you." I took a sip of my wine. "Yes, you did." "For what it's worth," she continued, her voice quieter now. "Liam underestimated you, too. We both did." "I know." She studied me for a moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Something almost like respect. "You won." I shook my head. "I didn't win. I just stopped losing." She smiled faintly, a real smile this time, not the polished corporate version. There's a difference. A big one. She nodded slowly, then extended her hand. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the patent filing. About the way I treated you. You were better than I gave you credit for. I shook her hand. Apology accepted. She picked up her bag from the display table. I should go. My flight's early tomorrow. Good luck with the startup, I said. Thanks. I'll need it. She walked away, disappearing into the crowd of conference attendees in their startup t-shirts and venture capital confidence. I watched her go and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, not even the hollow victory I might have expected. Just indifference. She was part of my past. And I was done looking back. Around that same time, I started seeing someone. His name was Ethan Stone, and I'd met him at a Sentinel board meeting where he'd been presenting research on predictive analytics. He was a data scientist, brilliant, thoughtful, with a kind of mind that found patterns where others saw chaos. He was also refreshingly uncomplicated. On our third date, over Vietnamese food at a tiny restaurant in the East Village, he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "You're kind of intimidating. You know that, right?" I laughed, nearly choking on my spring roll. "Is that a problem?" He smiled, eyes crinkling at the corners. "No, it's attractive. I spent too many years dating people who needed me to be less so they could feel like more. It's nice being with someone who doesn't need that." I set down my chopsticks. "What made you think I don't need that?" "Because you already know who you are," he said simply. "That's rare and kind of amazing." For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, I felt like someone saw me. Not as a threat, not as competition, not as someone to manage or diminish or compete with. Just as a partner. We took things slow. There was no rush, no pressure to define what we were or where it was going. I'd learned the hard way that some things can't be forced, that real partnership requires space to breathe. He asked about my work because he was genuinely interested, not because he wanted to take credit. He celebrated my successes without feeling diminished by them. When I traveled for conferences, he didn't sulk or demand reassurance. He just said, "Have a great trip," and meant it. It was so different from my marriage to Liam that sometimes I had to remind myself this was actually how it was supposed to feel. One quiet Sunday morning, about 3 years after the suspension that had changed everything, I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee and a blank piece of paper. I don't know what prompted it. Maybe it was seeing Chloe and realizing how far I'd come. Maybe it was the contentment I felt with Ethan. Maybe it was just time. I started writing a letter. Not to send, not to anyone specific, just to process, to close a chapter. "Dear Sophia, you're going to build something incredible, and someone you trust is going to try to take it from you. It will hurt. You'll question everything, your worth, your choices, your voice. You'll lie awake at night wondering if you're too sensitive, too demanding, too difficult. You'll make yourself smaller, trying to fit into spaces that were never designed for you. But here's what I need you to know. You are not invisible. You never were. You were just surrounded by people who needed you to be small so they could feel big. When the moment comes, and it will come, trust yourself. Trust the clauses you wrote when you were being paranoid. Trust the documentation you kept when everyone told you it was excessive. Trust the backups you made when they said you were overthinking. Trust that silence can be more powerful than shouting. And when it's over, when you've taken back what's yours, don't let bitterness take root. Don't become the thing you fought against. Build something new, something yours, something that reflects who you actually are, not who they needed you to be. You deserve it. You always did. Future you. I folded the letter and tucked it into my desk drawer underneath old contracts and forgotten business cards. A reminder, a relic, a promise kept. 3 years after Liam had stood at that podium and tried to erase me, I stood on the balcony of my Sentinel Systems office, looking out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the buildings in shades of amber and rose. Traffic hummed below. Somewhere a siren wailed. Life in all its messy complexity continued. Winter's Tech Solutions was stable under Catherine's leadership. Liam had moved to Colorado, last I heard, doing consulting work and learning to ski. We exchanged cordial emails occasionally about board business, but that was it. The anger had faded. The hurt had healed. We were just two people who'd once built something together and then had to tear it apart. Sentinel Systems was growing faster than any of us had anticipated. We just closed Series B funding. We were hiring. Michael and I were already planning the next phase, international expansion, maybe, or a strategic acquisition. I had equity, influence, respect. But more than any of that, I had peace. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago. Quiet, accommodating, making herself invisible to keep the peace. She was gone, not erased, but transformed, tempered by fire into something stronger. I'd learned that power isn't given. It's built line by line, clause by clause, backup by backup. Liam had tried to erase me. Chloe had tried to steal from me. The board had tried to overlook me. But I'd been 10 steps ahead the entire time. Because the most dangerous thing anyone can do is underestimate the woman who built the system, especially when she holds the blueprint. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Dinner at 7. I'm making that pasta you like. I smiled and typed back, perfect. See you then. I took one last look at the city. My city now, in a way it hadn't been before. Then turned away from the view and walked back to my desk. There was work to do, emails to answer, code to review. An empire to build. And this time, it was all mine. I sat down, pulled up my laptop, and got back to work. Not because I had to prove anything anymore, but because I loved what I'd built, and I was just getting started. This story of quiet corporate revenge, of finally reclaiming what was rightfully hers, really got under my skin. Sophia's journey from invisible architect to undeniable power is just chef's kiss. My favorite moment? It has to be when Liam finally asks, "What do you really want, Sophia?" and she lays out her demands with such chilling, unwavering calm. What about you? What was the moment in Sophia's story that hit you hardest? Was it her single, controlled all right as she walked out, knowing what was coming? Or perhaps Chloe's final, desperate attempt at a patent grab? Let me know in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts on this incredible comeback.